I was always curious about the directors and curious about how they were putting it together, and I'd watch various shows. You start finding out what you like and what you don't like about various characteristics that directors have.
Water spilled on Clint Eastwood, and the waitress walked off, thinking he was just a grumpy old man. She had no idea he owned the place. This fancy restaurant became the site of a big lesson. The next day, the truth hit hard, leaving her frozen in shock. Tune in to see how Clint Eastwood turned her rude behavior into a lesson she'll never forget. The lesson that changed it all. In the corner of an upscale restaurant, a weathered man in his 80s sat quietly, blending in with the ambience of soft lights and jazz. His sharp eyes scanned the menu, a seasoned observer sizing up his surroundings. This wasn't just any restaurant, though. It was his, though none of the waitstaff seemed to recognize him. For Clint Eastwood, Hollywood icon and quiet proprietor, anonymity was a rare gift, and tonight it served as a window into how his establishment was run. But as he lifted his glass, a hushed conversation at the next table caught his attention. A young waitress breezed past his table, her demeanor dripping with impatience. She rolled her eyes as he gestured for her attention. Her polished exterior barely masked her disdain, as though she had better things to do than serve an elderly man who looked, in her eyes, like another unimportant customer. She'd seen his type before, she thought. Old money, overly demanding, generous with opinions, but stingy with tips. Without so much as a glance, she dumped a glass of water on his table, splashing a bit onto his shirt. No apology followed, only a curt, "I'll be back when you're ready to order." Clint watched her go, her arrogance practically leaving a trail behind her. Years of being in the public eye had given him a thick skin, but what he saw here wasn't just rudeness directed at him. It was a symptom of something bigger, the kind of entitlement that could rot a team from the inside. This restaurant, with its reputation for elegance and first-class service, was not the place for such behavior. And Clint, despite his low-key demeanor, wasn't the type to let something like this slide. As the evening progressed, Clint observed her interactions with other patrons. The waitress maintained her attitude, tossing half-hearted smiles and clipped responses, oblivious to the ripple effect her demeanor had on the room. Other staff members moved with a practiced grace, picking up her slack and working harder to keep the guests happy. Her behavior stood out like a sour note in a symphony, glaringly out of place. Clint took mental notes, his instincts as sharp as they'd been during his acting and directing days. He'd built this restaurant not just as a business venture, but as a reflection of his values: respect, professionalism, and hard work. Watching this waitress flout those principles felt like watching someone take a sledgehammer to a work of art. At the end of his meal, he asked for the check. The waitress dropped it onto the table without a word, her expression unchanging. Clint signed it with a steady hand, leaving a generous tip despite her lackluster service. But this wasn't the end of their interaction, not by a long shot. The next day, Clint returned to the restaurant, but not as a customer. Dressed in a sharp suit, he walked through the doors with the authority of someone who belonged, instantly commanding attention. The staff's demeanor shifted. The same waitress from the night before looked up from her station, her face blanching as recognition dawned. It wasn't just that he was a celebrity, it was the realization that this man, the one she'd brushed off and disrespected, was the owner of the establishment. Without raising his voice, Clint addressed the staff in a private meeting. His words were measured but firm, like a director giving instructions on set. He spoke of the importance of treating every guest with dignity, regardless of appearances or assumptions. He didn't call out the waitress by name, but his gaze lingered on her long enough for the message to sink in. This wasn't just a reprimand, it was a lesson in humility and a reminder that no one was above the standards he'd set for his business. The waitress's cheeks burned with embarrassment, her previous confidence replaced by a heavy silence. In that moment, she understood the weight of her actions and the opportunity she'd nearly squandered. Working in a place like this wasn't just a job, it was a privilege, one that demanded respect for the craft and the people who made it possible. Over the following weeks, Clint's presence in the restaurant became a catalyst for change. The staff, inspired by his example, elevated their game. The waitress in particular took the lesson to heart, transforming her attitude and approach. She began to see her role not as a chore, but as an integral part of a larger experience. Patrons noticed the shift, and the restaurant's reputation for impeccable service grew even stronger. Clint didn't just stop at addressing the waitress's behavior. He took the time to engage with the entire team, listening to their concerns and providing insights on how to refine their craft. His approach wasn't about micromanaging, but about nurturing a sense of pride in their work. He emphasized the importance of teamwork, reminding them that every role, from the chef to the busser, was vital in creating the seamless experience their patrons had come to expect. The waitress, who had once dismissed her job as mundane, began to thrive under the new expectations. She started paying attention to details she'd previously ignored, like the subtle cues guests gave about their needs or the way a small gesture of kindness could completely turn someone's day around. What started as a humbling experience for her evolved into a personal transformation. She found herself genuinely enjoying her work, earning praise from both her colleagues and the guests she served. As for Clint, his involvement didn't wane. He became a regular presence in the restaurant, not as a figure of authority to be feared, but as a mentor to be respected. His ability to blend humility with high standards inspired the staff to rise to the occasion. The restaurant became more than just a place to dine. It became a reflection of the values Clint held dear. Word of the changes spread beyond the restaurant's walls, drawing in new patrons curious to experience the buzz for themselves. Critics took notice too, praising not only the food but the exceptional service. Clint's restaurant became a case study in how leadership from the top could ripple down to every level of an organization, elevating it to new heights. Looking back, the waitress could hardly believe how close she'd come to throwing away such an opportunity. She realized that her initial attitude hadn't just been unfair to the guests, but also to herself. By embracing the lessons Clint had imparted, she not only became a better server, but also grew as a person. For Clint, the experience reinforced a truth he'd long known: respect and hard work were the foundations of any success, whether in Hollywood or hospitality. And for those willing to learn, even the harshest lessons could lead to the most rewarding transformations. The real test came when someone from Clint's past showed up, threatening his calm life. A quiet stand in a room full of glamour. The room fell silent. The tension was palpable. Every eye in the restaurant now focused on the scene. Miguel's bus tub slipped from his hands, crashing to the floor with a loud clatter. Thomas, who had been making his way over, froze mid-step, his face pale. He set his glass down slowly, the movement deliberate and commanding. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. With a brief call, he requested the ownership papers and renovation plans to be brought to him immediately. When he ended the call, he looked back at Rachel, who was now visibly shaken. "You see, Rachel," he began, his voice calm but firm, "I bought this restaurant 6 months ago. I've been sitting at this table every Friday since. Not for the luxury, not for the prestige, but because this place stood for something real. 50 years ago, the Grand Oak was a place where everyone was treated with respect, regardless of who they were or what they wore. That's what I wanted to preserve." As he spoke, Jerry, the restaurant's accountant, arrived with a leather portfolio containing the documents he'd requested. Jerry handed them over with a respectful nod, stepping back to let him continue. Rachel's face had turned pale, the weight of her actions sinking in. He gestured toward Miguel. "This young man recognized me not because of social media or status, but because he watched my films with his family. He understands something you don't. Respect isn't about appearances, it's about how we treat people." Turning back to Rachel, he offered her a choice. "You can leave and find another job where appearances are all that matter, or you can stay and learn what real hospitality means. Miguel will start training as a waiter. If you choose to stay, you'll learn from him and the rest of the staff what it means to truly serve others." Rachel's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'd like to stay and learn, sir." He nodded, finishing his whiskey and standing up. "Good choice," he said simply. As he walked out, the room erupted in quiet applause, not for the celebrity in their midst, but for the lesson in humility and respect they'd all just witnessed. In the weeks that followed, the Grand Oak underwent a subtle transformation. Rachel's attitude softened, her eagerness replaced by a genuine desire to connect with guests. She learned to notice the details that mattered, not the designer labels or flashy attitudes, but the small moments of joy and appreciation from every customer. Miguel took his training seriously, moving up from busboy to waiter with ease. His confidence grew not just in his job, but in his ability to make a difference, one guest at a time. The regulars at the Grand Oak noticed the changes too. The older couple who had watched the scene that night became even more frequent visitors, often sharing stories with Miguel about their favorite films. The staff's camaraderie strengthened, their shared respect for the restaurant's core values, creating a bond that extended beyond their shifts. Even the influencers and tech moguls began to appreciate the sincerity of the service, their superficial expectations replaced by a genuine admiration for the warmth of the place. And every Friday, Clint Eastwood could still be found at his corner table, sipping his whiskey and observing the scene. He didn't need grand gestures or loud declarations. His presence alone was a quiet reminder that respect and authenticity would always have a place at the Grand Oak. The restaurant's success wasn't just in its luxury, but in its heart, a legacy of dignity and kindness that Clint had ensured would live on. Picture this: a fancy restaurant, posh vibes everywhere, and a waitress with an attitude so loud it practically echoes off the crystal chandeliers. Now throw Clint Eastwood into the mix. You know, the guy who's all about squinty stares and iconic one-liners. But let's dive deeper, because this isn't just any night. This is the night a clueless server decides to treat Clint like some regular Joe, not realizing he's the man who owns the whole darn place. Let's talk about the food, because let's be real, that's why we're here. Clint teamed up with a chef who knows his stuff, crafting a menu that's all about local, fresh, and ridiculously delicious ingredients. We're talking ribeye steaks that are so tender they practically melt, roasted beet salads that make you forget you're eating vegetables, and desserts that could win awards. The strawberry shortcake, a masterpiece of simplicity and flavor. Every dish tells a story, a nod to the land and the history of the place. But it's not just about the food, it's the people who make the magic happen. Clint's all about fostering a team that's as passionate as he is. He's the kind of guy who'll notice the busboy with a spark in his eye and help him climb the ranks. Case in point, Miguel. This kid started out clearing tables but had big dreams of becoming a chef. Clint saw that fire and made sure Miguel got the training he needed. Fast forward, and Miguel's not just part of the team, he's a rising star in the kitchen. Picture Clint strolling into his own restaurant, casual as ever. He's not one for grand entrances or letting people know he's a big deal. He'd rather sit quietly in a corner observing, soaking it all in. But on this particular night, fate had other plans. Enter the waitress, all attitude and no clue who she's dealing with. She's dismissive, maybe even a little snarky, and completely oblivious that the guy she's brushing off is the owner of the joint. Now, Clint's not the type to throw his weight around. He's got that quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need validation. So, he lets it slide, taking mental notes as the night goes on. It's not about revenge or proving a point, it's about understanding what's happening under the surface. Why is this server acting like this? Is it just a bad day, or is there a bigger issue at play? The restaurant changes and every dish carries a glimpse of something lasting, where every meal tells a story. When the night's over, Clint doesn't storm out or demand to see the manager. Instead, he takes his observations back to the drawing board. Maybe it's time for a staff meeting, a little refresher on what the Grand Oak stands for. It's a place of warmth, connection, and respect, values that Clint holds close to his heart. And if someone on the team isn't living up to that, well, it's an opportunity to make things right. But here's the thing about Clint, he's not just about fixing problems, he's about creating legacies. The Grand Oak isn't just a restaurant, it's a beacon of what's possible when you combine history, heart, and a little Hollywood flair. It's a place where the past meets the present, where every meal tells a story, and where even a less than perfect night can lead to something better. The Grand Oak has this magnetic charm that draws people in, not just for the food, but for the experience. Picture this: families gathering for special occasions, couples enjoying intimate dinners, and friends reconnecting over wine and laughter. It's more than just a restaurant. It's a haven, a space that feels like home no matter who you are. And Clint's fingerprints are all over it, from the ambience to the attention to detail that makes every visit memorable. Let's not forget about the behind-the-scenes magic that keeps the place running like a well-oiled machine. Clint's philosophy is simple: respect the land, honor the community, and never compromise on quality. That's why nearly every ingredient is sourced locally, from the tender steaks to the fresh herbs that garnish the plates. It's not just about supporting local farmers and reducing the carbon footprint, it's about creating a connection between the food on your plate and the land it came from. And then there's the decor. Every inch of the Grand Oak has been thoughtfully designed to blend old-world charm with modern elegance. The original wooden beams have been lovingly restored, antique furnishings add a touch of history, and the lighting creates a warm, inviting glow. It's the kind of place where you can feel the stories in the walls, where every detail whispers of a time when life was simpler, but just as full of meaning. As the years pass, the Grand Oak continues to thrive, its reputation growing as a destination for food lovers and history buffs alike. People come from miles around to experience the magic, drawn by tales of Clint's involvement and the promise of an extraordinary meal. But it's not just about the celebrity factor. At its core, the Grand Oak is about authenticity, about creating moments that matter, and about preserving a legacy that will endure for generations. Even Clint's personal connection to the place remains strong. He's a regular fixture, often seen quietly enjoying a meal in his favorite corner. He's not there to bask in the limelight, he's there to reflect, to observe, and to soak in the atmosphere he's worked so hard to create. For Clint, the Grand Oak is more than just a business venture. It's a labor of love, a tangible expression of his values and his vision. The Grand Oak stands as a shining example of what's possible when passion, purpose, and a deep respect for tradition come together. It's a place where history is celebrated, where community is nurtured, and where every guest is treated like family. Through his involvement, Clint has not only preserved a piece of Cherry Valley's heritage, but has also created a space where the simple joys of good food and good company can be savored and cherished. And there's even more to it. Beyond the day-to-day operations, the restaurant serves as a model for how businesses can integrate sustainability without sacrificing quality or experience. Clint's commitment to reducing waste and sourcing renewable energy is evident in every aspect of the Grand Oak. Solar panels discreetly tucked away power much of the restaurant, and the kitchen's zero-waste initiative ensures that even the smallest scraps find a meaningful purpose. These steps are not just good business practices, they reflect a philosophy rooted in respecting the environment and preserving it for future generations. The community connection is equally powerful. Clint has made sure that the Grand Oak is not just a restaurant, but a gathering place that gives back. Charity dinners, local fundraisers, and workshops with nearby schools have transformed it into more than a dining destination. It's become a hub of activity, fostering a deeper relationship between the restaurant and the people it serves. Local artists showcase their work in rotating exhibits, and musicians often fill the space with live performances that enhance the already rich atmosphere. It's this layered approach that makes the Grand Oak truly exceptional. From the first sip of wine to the last bite of dessert, every experience is meticulously designed to leave a lasting impression. Guests often comment not just on the food, but on the intangible sense of belonging they feel when they walk through the doors. That's the magic of Clint's vision, creating a place where everyone, from the staff to the patrons, feels a part of something bigger. What truly elevates the Grand Oak is the attention paid to the little moments. A guest once recalled how a waiter noticed they were celebrating a special anniversary and discreetly brought out a complimentary dessert with a handwritten note. It's these personalized touches that have transformed the restaurant from a dining spot into a memory-making destination. It's clear Clint's influence extends far beyond the menu. It's woven into the way people are treated and the memories they take home. For those who dine regularly, the Grand Oak is a second home, but for newcomers, it feels like a hidden gem. Stories of encounters with Clint himself have become part of the allure, shared in whispers or proud declarations to friends. Spotting him quietly observing the restaurant's rhythm, sometimes exchanging a few words with the staff, only adds to the magic. It's a reminder that this legendary figure isn't just an icon of the silver screen, but a man with a genuine love for creating something meaningful. Was Rachel's transformation at the Grand Oak a genuine change of heart, or just a survival tactic in a world obsessed with appearances? Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, subscribe for more stories.